Fanning. I'm Josh Hartnett. This is F1 Back at Base. Listen on BBC Sounds.
BBC Radio 5 Live.
The voice of the UK.
There's definitely a change in the area. It's growing.
So we're in an impossible situation.
It is challenging for everybody.
5 Live Drive.
With Chris Warburton and Clare Mcdonnell.
So welcome to Swindon. I am in the cafe, a little bit echoey now because it was a very busy lunch service, but that's all wrapped up for the day. Teas and coffee still available. I was chatting to Emma, the sous chef here at Prospect Hospice just a few minutes ago, and she's in the kitchen now making some apple turnovers. So hopefully we might get some of those in a moment. The reason we are here at this incredible facilities on the outskirts of Swindon, because this week the terminally ill adults end-of-life bill is back in the news, more commonly referred to as the assisted dying bill. And on its first reading, you'll remember in the Commons, it was voted through at the end of last year. So now it has reached the committee stage. And that committee, in charge of scrutinising the bill, has been hearing evidence from medical and legal experts. And today they sat again to continue 3 days of evidence discussing Kim Leadbeater's private member's bill. So we want to hear what people involved in this community think of it, the ones who do such essential work in hospices and palliative care, what they think about the bill. We're hearing from families with relatives here and voices on both sides of this extremely sensitive and complex debate, and many in the middle too, to find out what they want to know, what questions they want answered as the bill goes through its stages. So to give you a sense of what it's like behind the doors of a hospice, and there's many across the country, I was just given an exclusive look behind the scenes by one of the key members of staff here. We are now going to do a little tour of Prospect Hospice. I'm with Rose Still. You have a very important job here, Rose. Many jobs.
Many jobs, yeah, many jobs. So I am the Learning Development Trainer at Prospect, and I've been here about 18 months.
Now, you might have heard that it's got a little bit echoey because we've come into a room with lots of tables and chairs in, but it's completely empty. What's going on?
So this is our day therapy room that we used to host for respite, for day therapy for patients, and carers could come into the hospice. They would spend time with our therapy team, our occupational therapists and our physios. They would be able to have support in the hospice. Sadly, due to the funding crisis and post-COVID, we haven't been able to open this back up to the full capacity that we had previously.
Let's take a walk back out the room. I think we just walked past the kitchen. I did have lunch. It was absolutely incredible. I mean, you do have a cafe here that people can come from the outside and just use, don't you?
Absolutely. So we have our Heart of the Hospice is what we call it here. It is run by our amazing catering team, and we have a host of volunteers that actually lead on our cafe. So it's open 6 days a week to the public. We have lunch, and we also do breakfast on a Tuesday and a Thursday morning.
We're into the inpatient unit here, and there's lots of individual rooms, but I know that you have more rooms here than patients. So how many rooms, and why are the rest of them not occupied?
So we have 8 individual rooms that we could occupy, and we also are going to be heading into something called the Bay that we previously had before, that again was used as a multi kind of purpose area for respite care. So
yeah, we're going in here now. You just opened the door. Oh my goodness, look at this. It's a huge room with how many hospital beds and all kinds of equipment in here. No one in here.
Yeah, so our bays would have been used, again, prior to COVID. We could have 2 single-sex bays that had 4 patients in it, each room. And again, they would be used for things like respite care, pain management or symptom control. So somebody could come in, but they were in a space with other patients. So they had that community as well when they were here for that care. But sadly, due to COVID and due to the financial crisis, we haven't been able to use these anymore for...
So talk us through the figures then. How much money do you get a year from government, and how much do you make up through charitable donations?
So we get about 22% of our funding from the government, and the rest is our own income generation, and that's through our income generation team of our retail team. So our retail team actually bring in more money per year than the government give us.
Standing in this room, I mean, the grounds are stunning. It's just such a wonderful facility, and it feels like such a waste that it's not being used when you know that outside those doors there are people who need it. And those figures are so stark. What do you think needs to change with how we view the money as we as a society put into this kind of facility?
Amazing question. I think everyone, I speak on behalf of all of the staff and the volunteers at Prospect Hospice and all hospices, it's dignity in death, and it's supporting people in one of the worst possible times of their life to die with choice and die how they want, die in a way that supports them and their family. And without the funding, we cannot do that.
Rose, you're a busy woman. I won't keep you. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you so much. Have a lovely day.
And she's probably in a meeting right now. We were hearing there from Rose about the funding challenges faced by the hospice sector. A government spokesperson has told us this. We are working with the palliative and end-of-life care sector to make it sustainable in the long term, including via our 10-year health plan. In December, we announced a £100 million funding boost for hospices to improve facilities and allow them to focus on wider resources on patient care. So, as I said, after last year's debate in the Commons, today the committee sat for the second of 3 days of evidence discussing details of the bill. I'm joined here in the cafe of Prospect Hospice here in Swindon by, around the table, Jeremy Loon, CEO of Prospect Hospice. Jeremy, welcome.
Well, hello. Thank you for having us.
It's a fantastic facility you've got here. I'm also delighted to say that Nathan and his dad, Melvin, are here with us. Melvin is terminally ill and is a fundraiser for the hospice. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us. We really do appreciate it. Jeremy, we heard there about the funding gap, and you've got, I mean, it's quite shocking when you walk around a hospice like this and you know how much these facilities are needed in the community, and there are rooms with beds in that are empty. How frustrating is that?
I'm not allowed to swear on air, obviously, am I? But it's extremely frustrating. And we're part of a national campaign. Hospice UK is our umbrella organisation, 200 hospices. They're campaigning tirelessly on our behalf. They've been negotiating with the government, parliamentarians and so on. We've got a very loud local voice. Everyone who's used our services knows it's fundamentally unfair. The £100 million, it's capital funding, which is wonderful.
This is what the Health Secretary announced at the end of last year.
Yes.
So that means on buildings, not staff. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly right. So you've already seen that we've got facilities here that aren't staffed at the moment. So I'm hoping it's a sign of good intent with the budgetary constraints that the government had. It's all they could do for us now. And it's a line in the sand that says going forward, they will fix the model. There's an all-party parliamentary group that last year identified that the central funding model is not fit for purpose. Their words, not mine. That has to change, and it has to change really urgently, because hospices collectively in the last few months have closed 300 beds. So we're not alone. We're part of Hospice UK. Every single hospice is feeling that pressure.
And you've got friends in high places, haven't you? Because Queen Camilla was here just last week echoing those words.
She absolutely was. It was brilliant. She's our president, and she's brilliant with people. She went in to talk to people who were dying at the last few days of their life, just as my colleagues do, naturally, as human beings. She couldn't really understand why we haven't got more beds open, just as you articulated. And she, at one point, said the government should come in and see what you do, which isn't politically divisive. It's just the fact. It doesn't matter who's in power. This situation's gone on for too long and has to change now. And
when you see it with your own eyes, it is pretty shocking, because you think, what an amazing facility. And we went into the respite room, one of the respite rooms, and you think, there's families out there who really need a break. And it's here. There's just not the staff to open that room up. Let's bring in Nathan and Melvin. Melvin, let's start with you. What is your health situation at the moment?
Unfortunately, I've got lung cancer and it's terminal.
Right.
Unfortunately, the consultant that I was under last year terminated life. Make the most of what time you've got, which I've been doing bits and pieces with the family and grandchildren. We did do, just before Christmas, a Sunday down in Wells, Somerset, where I abseiled down the cliff. That was the easy bit. The worst bit was getting up to it.
That's incredible, Melvin. You are grabbing every moment by the throat.
Well, we found out yesterday when I started chemo session, we had to see a doctor before I allowed him to go too far, where I found out that for a while now, I've had pains in the left side where they took half the lung out 3.5 years ago. I found out that I've got fractured and broken rib, numbers 5, 6, 7 and 8, which I'm now waiting for an x-ray. So, life isn't fantastic.
No, but you use this facility. Try and put into words
Yes.
what difference it makes for you.
This facility, since I've been out here just a year now, coming out on odd days, I've met people out here. One of the nurses, she's now, so I was informed a month ago, she's now a Queen's nurse. Congratulations.
Yeah, fantastic. Listen, I'm going to move on to Nathan. I mean, this is an incredible facility and your father's getting a lot out of it. I mean, one of the reasons we're here is to discuss the assisted dying bill. And I know there's different opinions in your family on this. So, Nathan, where do you stand?
So before, I didn't agree with it. But over the probably last year or two, excuse me, I've kind of swayed towards going, with the assisted dying, especially now seeing Dad struggle. It's not fair. And with the trouble that they could get into if they did, assist the dying of that loved person, it shouldn't be. When you have pets, you take them to the vet when they're ill and in pain. Why can't it be the same with a loved one or a parent?
So you had a completely different view before you saw your father go through this?
Yeah, because obviously your loved ones, your parents, you want them around for as long as possible. But when they're suffering, it's just as bad as losing them. They shouldn't have to suffer. They should be able to have the choice to have an assisted death, or not, and without anyone getting in trouble for it.
Melvin, is this anything that you thought about before you got ill? Did you even contemplate this?
Unfortunately, the wife had COPD for a long time. I run my own garage for 36 years. A lot of the customers became friends. They used to come in for cups of coffee because they got on well with the wife, and that it was always, even if they phoned up, first question is, how's the wife? I would return by saying, still breathing. We used to take the Michael out of death. Unfortunately, she died last year, today. But since I've been terminated, your views are different. But when the wife had COPD, we asked a question up at the Great Western with the consultant, Dr. McKinley. We asked, what's the chance of a set of lungs or a lung? We've been talking to 2 people outside in the corridor before we got called in. And when we asked that question, she swiveled in her chair, looked out the window, laughing her socks off. Me and the wife just looked at each other. Have we said something funny? When she realised that we wasn't joining in the laughter, oh, you're serious. That is when we find out, before anyone gets a lung or a pair of lungs, one, there's got to be a candidate that's going to die before you. But at the end of the day, according to her, you've got to be 2 hours away from death.
Right. I mean,
so yes, I have changed my opinion. Yes, I would even go to Switzerland and pay for euthanasia. But anyone that takes me, when they arrive back in this country, their passports are removed.
listen, your family has been through such a lot in the last year, and we massively appreciate you stopping by to talk to us. You've got the debate off by centering it in real life.
Right, thank you very much.
And we really appreciate it, Nathan and Melvin. Good luck with your
Thank
treatment. And just very briefly, Jeremy, this is, you can talk about in theory and bills, but this is all about people's lives, isn't it? And people not wanting to see their loved ones suffer is such a strong part of this argument, isn't it?
It absolutely is. Hospices at the moment are neutral on assisted dying, but that doesn't mean we're not talking about it. And we know the one thing that comes up in the discussion time and time again is people's choice. So if hospices aren't there in the way they should be, then people don't have that pure choice. And that needs to be addressed for me as another case for the urgency of the decision. And as these two have beautifully articulated, people's views change depending on their circumstances, but we've got to give people the right options at the right time.
Thank you all so much for dropping by. I know you're going to stick around, Jeremy. Jeremy Loon, their CEO of Prospect Hospice, and Nathan and his dad, Melvin, will be here for the next 3 hours, Chris, mulling over all of these arguments and talking to some very important voices here in the community.
Yes, and we want to hear listeners' stories as well, don't we? And your thoughts that might be provoked from some of the conversations that you're having there, Claire. Tony in Carnarvon is obviously listening, and he said, my father would not have benefited from this bill. He was taken into hospital due to the pain he was in, spent 4 days begging me, doctors and nurses, to help him to die because he was in so much pain and misery. He was 76 years old, had no chance of recovery, was not receiving any treatment for his cancer. Took him 6 days to die. The last 2 of which were in a drug-induced stupor with no ability to eat, drink or go to the toilet. I keep hearing that end-of-life or palliative care should be better, but surely part of end-of-life or palliative care should include allowing and helping people to have peaceful, pain-free death with the help of drugs, which is what my father and his family needed. Doctors, in their oath, promised to do no harm. Well, they did an awful lot of harm to my father and the family, says Tony. It haunts me every day. Thank you for sharing that, Tony. And I guess, Claire, that's what we want to hear from our listeners this afternoon as well, don't we?
Absolutely. Yeah. Do get in touch. You'll hear a variety of voices. This is such a complex issue and really, really hard to land on one side or the other. But we hope by the time we get to 7 o'clock, we'll have answered and explored as many parts of this debate as it is possible to explore. So hopefully by 7 o'clock, you'll feel you are a little better informed on all of this.
Absolutely.
Plan A. I don't even want to see Plan B. Next.
For this one, Lord Sugar,
We're in an impossible situation.
Is because we're talking about the everybody
5 Live Drive
with Chris Warburton and Clare Mcdonnell.
It is 5 Live Drive. It's Chris Warburton and Clare Mcdonnell, and I am at Prospect Hospice in Swindon for the programme today. It's a charity which offers free hospice care 24 hours a day, and the reason we're here is because we're talking about the Assisted Dying Bill as the Palliative and End-of-Life Adult Care Commission continues to hear evidence this week ahead of the bill's next stage. So they're on day 2 of hearing from expert witnesses. So we're talking through all the angles associated with this. I'm delighted to say, around our table here in the cafe, I'm joined by Alexa Pyatt, who has fought for families of British people who've gone to places like Dignitas in Switzerland. She's a partner in the Disputed Wills and Estates team at Mitchell Moores LLP. Alexa, welcome.
Thank you, Claire.
Also joined on the line now by Dr. Richard Sheffer, a former palliative care consultant who supports the law change. Dr. Sheffer, welcome to you.
Thank you very much.
Alexa, let's start with what you do then. So families come to you, and then what is your role when they've decided that they want their loved one, or their loved one has decided they want to go to Dignitas, which is where they have to go at the moment? What's your role?
So I have been instructed in a number of these cases, both pre-death and post-death. I'm instructed by the family members, as you say, who have provided a level of assistance to the loved one seeking the assisted death at clinics such as Dignitas, but not always Dignitas. There are others in Switzerland. I assist them in preparing for a post-death application in the civil court for relief from forfeiture.
What does that mean?
So what that means is that by providing the assistance, they technically will commit the offence of assisting suicide.
Even if it's in another territory where it's legal?
No, well, yes. So the act of the assisted death will take place in a different jurisdiction, but the assistance, if it's provided in this jurisdiction, is a criminal offence. And so when they commit the offence, then automatically practically, there is a rule of public policy in the UK called the forfeiture rule, which means that they automatically forfeit their interest in their loved one's estate, in jointly owned assets, pensions, life insurance policies and the like. And so that means that really tragically, when they come back to this jurisdiction, not only do they face the potential consequences of the potential for criminal prosecution, they go through a criminal investigation. They then also have to face the application in the civil court for relief from forfeiture. So it's a long and traumatic process for them, and that's where I come in to assist them with the civil aspect.
Right.
Of that.
So there is a criminal investigation into them when they return.
Yes.
And then you have to say, this is what we have to get in place before you travel to Switzerland, because otherwise all of this kind of, family inheritance could be in doubt.
Yes, I mean, it's a two-pronged approach because of the criminal aspect. And though I'm not a criminal specialist, I will guide my clients to the criminal specialist who can assist them with that process. But it's all intertwined, and it's really important because the civil judge will look at a variety of factors in deciding whether or not to grant relief from forfeiture, and the decision of the DPP not to prosecute is but one of the factors that's relevant in a successful relief from forfeiture application. And as I said, I'm sometimes instructed pre-death, and there's a lot of early preparation that I can do with the families, capacity assessments for the person who's seeking the assisted death, having somebody independent meet with them and take a witness statement from them so that they can explain in their own words that this is their decision, the reasons for the decision, that it's their settled intention, there's been no coercion, no pressure from loved ones, and that's important evidence.
A couple of quick questions then before we go to Dr. Scheffer. When you've had a look at this legislation, what do you think is missing?
I think there are a few things that obviously need some more scrutiny, and I know that's happening at the moment. Things like the judicial oversight. I think Sir Nicholas Mosden mentioned yesterday in the committee about the capacity of the family division for judges. As drafted, the bill requires a High Court judge from the family division to oversee applications in accordance with the bill. And I think my experience of the court system is that they are incredibly overrun, and so wouldn't necessarily have the capacity to deal with cases of this nature. And so an amendment to the wording of the bill to provide for, I quite liked his suggestion of the Spanish-style panel, which is sort of more multidisciplinary. So you have a lawyer and a medic who are on the panel to consider all of the objective medical evidence. And
all right. We'll put that to our guest actually coming later, because supporters and detractors alike. Dr. Scheffer, where do you stand on assisted dying? Has your position shifted?
Yes, it has shifted over the years because I was trained in the 1980s at St Christopher's Hospice in London, and the teaching there was that euthanasia, as it was called in those days, was absolutely unnecessary. But the very first patient I ever met who was not able to be helped by palliative care was there while I was working as a registrar training in palliative care. And so my ideas began to shift even then, thinking that, well, if we can't help this man suffering, who can? What should be done for him? So my ideas have shifted. But I am a palliative care physician first and foremost, and we need to note that, in fact, in most jurisdictions, the number of people choosing assisted dying is a very small proportion of those dying. So that if it's something like 1% of the maximum, that says that palliative care and the provision of good palliative care is necessary for 99% of people, and they are adequately cared for.
And obviously, this bill is at the committee stage at the moment, so MPs calling expert witnesses to scrutinise it and add amendments. What amendments would you suggest, if any?
Well, I think the point that your guest has already made was there is a concern about timeliness of it, because it's no good having a system as the witnesses made yesterday. The point that witnesses made yesterday, it's no good having a system when the system takes so much time, is that people who are applying for instance death would die during that process. So I think that issue around the judicial review need to be looked at. It is very important to have adequate safeguards, and the safeguards are still good. And we need to be confident that it's going to be not only well safeguarded, but also timely for those people who are applying.
We do hear, though, especially from the disabled lobby, that there are other jurisdictions who have brought in the right to die, Canada, for example, and then there has been a mission creep, and then they brought in a caveat, which is if you are having unbearable suffering, then you can also request to have your life ended in this way. And they say this is the reason that you should never open that door, because you don't know where it might lead. What do you say to that?
Well, I think the odds of that is the fact that the law that is proposed in that country, there's no relation to that, and Canada, the whole system is different. And they're in jurisdictions which have laws similar to the one we are presenting, we are proposing in this country, or is currently before Parliament, is there is no evidence. In fact, Oregon, the system has been in place for 25 years, and it hasn't changed. Yes, things can change, and society alters, and who knows where we'll be in 25 or 30 years' time. But the problem we have now is there are people suffering, and a small percentage of people, but they are suffering palliative care is not adequate to deal with that suffering, and we need to answer the questions society. What do we do for those people now?
Yes, the argument many people make on this programme today, and indeed the facility I know now in a hospice in Swindon, is that you make palliative care better. As someone who specialises in this field and has done for a very long time, is that possible?
Of course, palliative care will always improve, and it must improve, and it has improved enormously over the years. Palliative care services in the United Kingdom are the best in the world. That's well recognised. And the fact is they can still improve more. We're not talking about either palliative care or assisted dying. We need both. So those who are adequately cared for by palliative care are cared for and die naturally. But that small group of patients, or small percentage of patients who find their suffering isn't dealt with by palliative care, have a way out.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Sorry.
Well, you've made a very strong point then to end on. Dr. Richard Sheff, a former palliative care consultant who supports, as you heard, the law change very briefly, Alexa. You say that the majority of people that you represent, and this is a key point as well, do not have 6 months or less to live, do they?
None of the families that I've been involved with, the individual who's sought and obtained an assisted death, none of them have been terminal. They have all been people who have had incurable conditions. It may be that in terms of avoiding potential mission creep, but also focusing on capturing groups of society that actually are the majority of people seeking an assisted death, dignitas. I think around 50% are people in the category I've described with intolerable suffering and incurable illness, and won't be caught by this bill, and perhaps the emphasis should be on intolerable suffering rather than terminal illness.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for joining us, Alex Hyatt, who fought for families of British people who've gone to places like Dignitas in Switzerland. We'll continue the debate down here, Chris, and we'll hear from two politicians on either side of the debate just after 5.
Well, it's so interesting to hear such considered thoughts about such a controversial and difficult issue. Mark in Manchester had texted as well, getting personal experiences from our listeners as well, of course. One thing I don't get about the opponents to the bill, says Mark, who say we need better palliative care. In a lot of cases, we simply don't have the medical means. Doses of morphine is the main pain relief, which simply isn't enough for many. The science simply isn't there to permanently relieve pain. In my opinion, the bill doesn't go far enough. It should include conditions like Parkinson's and MND, for which there is also no palliative care medicine to help relieve their pain and suffering. Your experiences, please, on 85058 on this afternoon. Plenty more from Prospect Hospice in Swindon throughout the programme. Also keeping across what else is
at 2:15 on 05 Live.
5 Live Drive.
The terminally ill adults.
Chris Warburton on digital radio on BBC Sounds.
And ask your smart speaker to play BBC Radio 5 Live.
Good afternoon, welcome back. We've got a bit of a different sounding drive for you this afternoon. I'm live from Prospect Hospice, just outside Swindon, because we are discussing the terminally ill adults end of life bill. It's day 2 of it currently being discussed by a committee in Westminster. Evidence from expert witnesses is going to be heard until tomorrow. So a fantastic opportunity for us to take the programme out into the community, into the heart of such a special community like this one just outside Swindon. I'm in the cafe. The apple turnovers have arrived. So I don't know whether Emma, the sous chef, can hear me, but thank you very much for those, Emma. So lots of people milling around in the background. Dinner's being served at the moment to patients in their rooms. I'm delighted to say I'm joined around our table here in the cafe by Ken Blanton, a psychotherapist here at Prospect Hospice and an expert on end-of-life care. Ken, welcome.
Thank you.
Just move your microphone up a little bit, would you? Just to your mouth. That's absolutely perfect. Tell us what you do here, Ken.
I do several things. I work one-to-one with patients who are not necessarily at end of life, but have been diagnosed with a terminal illness, and I see them as outpatients. I see people on the ward who have been admitted for symptom control or for end of life. And I work with the staff, clinical supervision it's called, to kind of help them deal with some of the aspects in the professional role of working with the people that are dying.
What do you do precisely? What do you offer?
An opportunity for people to kind of unpack what it is that they're going through.
Okay, and how do you do that?
Oh gosh, lots of different ways. I do a lot of dream work, dealing with unconscious processes and that sort of thing. I think it's important to note here when we're talking about assisted dying, we're already doing the assisted dying. And so there are actually 3 deaths that kind of happen. There's the diagnosis, and then there's the beginning of what that means to the identity of the person. So I would say that's the beginning of the suffering of the ego identity.
So what am I going to become if I'm no longer this person?
Yes, and in the spiritual existential sense, what does this mean? What does this diagnosis mean?
And do you find people want to talk about that?
Some do.
Yeah?
Lots do. Lots of people, just in terms of the way they were brought up, we don't talk about these things, which Jeremy's always really good about, about espousing, that we need to be talking about it.
Yeah, Jeremy, the CEO here. Yeah. Your role is paid for here partly by whom?
By a gentleman named Harry, who was here, and very spiritually oriented, existential, kept a journal, really, really good, went through the process with he and his wife and his family. And because of his experience of that they decided to leave some money to be able to kind of help develop this post around the existential spiritual care.
Yeah, and he was young.
Yeah, late 20s.
Late 20s, really, really, really tragic. What do you find people get out of what you offer them? What do they tell you?
Oh, all kind of different things. I don't want to wax too philosophical, but in the coming to terms with this, it actually provides an opportunity to what I would call rediscover self. So self in relationship to the ego. And so a lot of this in relation to the suffering. There's a brilliant quote by Carl Jung who says, we can't come into consciousness without pain or suffering. So the suffering is then becoming aware. What does it mean to be me? And what does it mean for me to be loved and to love? So you'll get people who come in with this ego identity. I'll give a great example of a lady a long time ago, which would tie into the assisted dying death. She didn't want to have anything to do with psychotherapy. She didn't want to have anything to do with spirituality. She just wanted to die. But as she began to get closer, she then decided that she'd like to have a conversation with me. So I went in to have a conversation, and this woman had been married at 18 to get out of the house from an abusive father. So married, the love of her life, had 5 children back to back. And then he got overwhelmed and committed suicide. So she decided, in her love of this guy and the tragedy and what all that kind of dealt with, that she was going to just concentrate on her kids. And so she became a matriarch. So when she called me in to have this discussion, her question was this: what's the difference between giving up and letting go?
That's very deep.
I'll tell you. And so we had this conversation about what it meant for her to to let go of her responsibility as mother. That was her ego identity. She was mother, grandmother, great-grandmother. And was she quitting in her role as matriarch if she was going to was she giving up? And as we began to unpack that and work through that, she actually became a little bit more comfortable, and I think she lived maybe 4 more days when she reconciled it and then died peacefully.
Do you think, and I think I already know the answer to this question, but do you think we should be asking ourselves these deeper questions about our life and existence before we get to the end of life stage?
Oh, no, absolutely. And even when we're not in the end of life phase, but because we're all experiencing deaths, and I don't mean to be trite, but, if I lose a job, it's a death of my ego in relationship to that. If I end a relationship, all these things are losses. So we experience death in lots of little, they're micro deaths, but they're still deaths.
What do you get out of working here?
Oh my gosh, the privilege of being, I don't want to get misty, but the privilege of working alongside people as they're struggling to kind of understand and come to terms with, not only the diagnosis, but who they are in relationship to this, whether a mother, father, brother, son, daughter, and then the staff who go in day to day and care and concern and how they carry that. And then they have to then go, out into their personal lives. And I think there's a misperception in healthcare in general that we can somehow separate out the personal and the professional. And working in palliative care, it's a privilege, but there's an intensity to it, very similar to mental health, but it's just different.
You can't leave it at the door, can you, really?
No.
It kind of seeps into your being. Final word, Ken, on the assisted dying bill. You're somebody who's in palliative care, you're around this all the time, and big questions being asked of our country at the moment as to what we should do where people are really, really suffering, and whether we should allow them to have control over the end of their life. What's your view?
Well, I think it will always come down to the autonomy of the individual. The individual has to have the opportunity. What we are to do in that assisted dying is to help people come to and alleviate their suffering as insofar as possible that we can. There's something called total pain, where there's a lot of psychological pain that's manifesting physically. And so there's something about helping that person work through that, and then in all of it, at the end, it needs to be their decision.
It's been an education talking to you, Ken. Thank you so much for dropping by. Ken Blanton there, psychotherapist here at Prospect Hospice. We can bring in Lord Charles Falconer now, former Labour Justice Secretary, who introduced his own bill in the House of Lords prior to the bill that's being discussed at the moment. Lord Falconer, welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much for having me.
You have been a long-time supporter of assisted dying. Why is this bill the right bill as far as you're concerned?
Because I think people, in a way that Ken described it so movingly then, should ultimately have the choice where they're terminally ill about how they die. I was so impressed by what Ken was saying about trying to help people come to terms with what's happening to them, particularly when they're terminally ill. But he was looking at it in a much wider context. But ultimately, it should be their choice. And from having been involved in this issue for a very, very long time, no matter how good the palliative care may be for people, there will always be a small group of people who cannot bear the thought of going on. It might be for a few more days, or it might be for a few more weeks or a few more months. But their choice would be to end the suffering of their terminal illness. And the consequence of the law at the moment is they have to very often do that in secret, not just in secret from the authorities, but in secret from those that they love, and have a death entirely on their own, which is horrible. I think this is the right law. I think we need to debate the detail very closely, but I do believe the time has come for the change, and I think broadly Parliament supports that.
I mean, the key argument at the centre of all of this is balancing the rights of people who want to die with the responsibility of society to protect the people who don't. I have to ask you about the disabled lobby who are concerned about mission creep. I mentioned Canada earlier. 2016, the Medical Assistance in Dying Act was brought in. It was then amended in 2021 to include those experiencing intolerable suffering from an irreversible illness or disability. This is the major concern. Once you open the door, we're already on that path that other people could start to think, I am the burden, I am the problem, or life is just too difficult. How can you assure people that we will have those protections in this country and it will never change?
I agree with you that the key dilemma to solve is the balance between making sure that you protect people who might be vulnerable, and when you are dying, there is a degree of vulnerability, obviously, against giving those who really, really want to bring it to an end, to stop their suffering, to have that right. That very much depends upon the safeguards, and the safeguards that are in the bill are 2 doctors have got to be satisfied that the person really wants it, and there is a 3rd layer, which currently is a judicial level, checking that that is indeed what the person wants. They've got the capacity to make the decision and they're not in any way being coerced. This is the most safeguarded bill in the world. You're referring to places, for example, Canada, where intolerable suffering is been allowed in, and it's been allowed in ways that maybe people in the UK would not think is satisfactory. The way that you prevent that is not having an intolerable suffering bill, as they've got in Canada, but a bill here which is based on terminal illness and giving people the choice. Can one guarantee that the law would never change because Parliament might change it in the future? I can't give that guarantee, but I'm pretty clear, looking at other countries such as Oregon, that once they introduced an autonomy bill, a terminal illness bill, that's where it stuck.
Okay, just a very brief final answer from you, if you wouldn't mind. We just had a legal practitioner here with us in the hospice who helps families navigate the legal challenges that face them assisting their loved ones. She has concern over judicial oversight, that what you've just mentioned. She says the legal system here is at breaking point. It can't cope with any more. That's where she sees the flaw in this bill. Just a brief answer to that, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes, and I think we need to look at how we ensure that there's somebody as respected as a judge, maybe outside the legal system, but a judge applying the law who provides the protection. But whatever it is, there's got to be that 3rd layer of protection.
OK, Lord Charles Faulkner, thank you very much indeed, former Labour Justice Secretary. Let's bring in Danny Kruger now, Conservative MP for East Wiltshire, who's on the committee that's been hearing evidence this week. He's hot-footed it from that committee to talk to us now. Good afternoon.
Hi there.
Listen, we just heard from Lord Faulkner, who says this is the most safeguarded bill in the world. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not sure it is completely, but it's inspired by various other jurisdictions around the world. And we know that everywhere that has a law like this, people get swept into the scope of it who you or I would not think should be eligible for an assisted death. You know, people with eating disorders, people who have long-term chronic conditions. You know, the definition of terminal illness is absolutely impossible. You can't say when somebody's going to die. Half of all these 6-month prognoses that doctors make turn out to be inaccurate. And many disabled people, particularly, we've heard evidence today from very, very powerful evidence from disabled people correctly pointing out that they qualify as terminally ill if they refuse their treatment or don't take whatever medication they're on. They would qualify, and indeed that's what happens elsewhere. So from the beginning of the bill, the first words, terminally ill, I'm afraid we have the problem of definition. And then there's a whole bunch of other anxieties that have been exposed in the evidence sessions today. So I'm afraid this bill remains very, very problematic.
So what you're saying, there is absolutely no wording that you can imagine that would successfully protect people who put themselves in that category of terminally ill deliberately, for example. We couldn't get a protection in this bill for those people.
Well, it is very hard. The alternative some countries have don't talk about terminal illness. They talk about unbearable suffering, which I think is why most people think that it might be a good idea to have an assisted dying bill, because we all recognise, how appalling it is to die in agony, and we should want to try and prevent that. In fact, the majority of people who opt for assisted dying in other countries don't do it because of pain and suffering, because it is possible to treat pain very successfully in most cases these days, and we should be focusing on ensuring that everybody gets good quality pain relief at the end. The real reason that people opt for assisted dying, I'm afraid, is a whole bunch of social and psychological reasons about loneliness, feeling a burden, feeling worthless, feeling scared. And I think that it's a terrible thing that we enable people to have a death facilitated by a doctor in those circumstances. And if you change the definition from terminal illness to include people with unbearable suffering, then again, that's a very subjective concept, and many people would feel they're suffering unbearably today, but in a month's time, after things have changed for them, they've got better treatment, they don't feel that. So
we have to say at this stage there are no plans. Excuse me, interrupting. We have to say there's no plans to change the wording on that at the moment. We also just heard from Dr. Richard Sheffer. Now, he's worked in palliative care for 30-odd years and started off with a very different view on assisted dying. But the more he's worked in palliative care, the more he's seen people who, whatever you give them, it doesn't alleviate their suffering at the end of life. And he's saying, essentially, to help those 5%, as long as you protect the 95%, he is for it. He says that is the humane way to do this if you get the legislation right. What do you think of the principle of that?
Well, that might be right. The question is, can you get the legislation right? And the great majority of doctors working in palliative care, in end-of-life care, don't believe we should change the law because they recognise you can't get the legislation right just to identify those tiny number of people who we could all recognise would benefit from an assisted death. The danger is, and we heard this again from very powerful witnesses today talking about the impact on, particularly on disadvantaged communities, minority communities, where there's a lot of distrust of the health system already. If there was the genuine option that a doctor or a hospice or NHS hospital could put them on a pathway to an early death, we would damage enormously the already very thin trust that people have in the healthcare system. So my concern is not just for the people who, and I think it's a real problem, would be swept into this, people with anorexia, people with mental health conditions. The bill tries to exclude them, but it doesn't succeed.
Why doesn't it succeed? Why not? Why can't you have provision?
Just to finish my point, I'm also worried about the wider impact on our society of changing this law. To that point, well, because terminal illness is an impossible concept to define. And in other countries, including even in the UK, in fact, we doctors here in the NHS will diagnose somebody who has got severe anorexia as terminally ill. They talk about terminal anorexia. We put people on the pathway to an early death using these do not resuscitate orders during COVID. Already, it's very, very possible for the system to decide that somebody is essentially dying, and to take a decision that's what's going to happen to them, even if they might not be dying, even if they might be amenable to treatment, even if they themselves might change their mind in a couple of weeks' time. So I'm afraid it's just too dangerous overall. And really, all this energy that we're talking about and potentially spending billions of pounds on, we should be putting that into ensuring that everybody gets good quality end-of-life care, which is so good in patches. It's amazing. This country leads the world. But it's very, very patchy, and not everybody gets it. If everybody got access to high-quality palliative care, A, we would hardly hear any of these terrible horror stories we all hear about, and B, then that might be the occasion on which we can say, for the tiny minority who palliative care can't help, okay, then let's do assisted dying. But let's not do it now, because at the moment what will happen is that people will opt for it because the care that they really need in the NHS or in hospices is not available, and that's my great concern.
Thank you so much for joining us. Danny Kruger there, Conservative MP for East Wiltshire. Good to have you on the programme, on that committee that is sitting, hearing from those expert witnesses. One more day tomorrow. You also heard from Lord Charles Faulkner, former Labour Justice Secretary, and Ken Blanton. Thanks for dropping by, Ken. Sure. Really great to have you on the programme. And just to say, Chris, the lawyer we spoke to earlier, who helps with the legal side of things for families assisting a loved one at the moment going to Dignitas, the majority of people that she helps do not have 6 months or less to live. So she's saying, actually, she can't imagine if this bill does go through, it really is going to have a very, very narrow uptake. The majority of her clients are people who are living in intolerable suffering.
Yes.
And that isn't in this bill at the moment. So they will carry on having to leave the country.
Yeah. Okay. Could you pass a message on to Ken from
yes, I can.
Daniel in Leeds. Hello, Daniel. Thanks for getting in touch. He just says, you need Ken on more. He sounds amazing. That has completely made my day, and I feel lifted just by listening to him.
Ken, Daniel in Leeds says we need to book you more because you've completely made his day, and he feels lifted just listening to you. I'll try and get his number off him
nice.
for you,
That
Daniel.
is nice, isn't it? And only just because you've mentioned it a couple of times now, Claire, the apple turnover. How puffy is the puff pastry?
Oh my goodness, I've taken a picture. The woman's a talent and no mistake. I haven't eaten one yet because I think I'd have to have a nap afterwards.
Yeah,
but
leave it
out
till 7.
I'll put it out on social media. Yeah.
Go through the West Midlands on the southbound side at 10 at Walsall.
The more you see. Series of great minds that...
Welcome back to the cafe at Prospect Hospice in Swindon. I am here as we discuss the terminally ill adults end-of-life bill. Part of the conversation has brought up the importance of good palliative care and essentially why there isn't enough of it. We're going to have this conversation in just a few moments with two experts in the field. But let's bring in Elise now. Elise joins us and Elise has a terminal diagnosis. Elise, welcome to the programme.
Hi, Claire. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. What is your situation at the moment?
So I was diagnosed in July last year. I had breast cancer originally in 2020 during the pandemic. Had about a year of treatment, then got the all clear. And then after about 8 months of symptoms, including, I couldn't breathe. I could barely speak. I could hardly walk. It took a long time to get a diagnosis, but eventually got the diagnosis that I had secondary cancer of lungs, liver and bones. So now I'm on treatment now and responding well for now, but I've had surgery. My femur, the cancer was eating away at my bones. So I've had a metal rod put in my femur, which causes quite a lot of pain. I'm on a lot of painkillers, but on the whole, responding well to treatment at the moment. But I'm fully aware that's not forever.
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like you're really going through the ringer and we really sympathise with your situation, Elise. We're talking about, do you think you're getting the right kind of palliative care at the moment? That's part of the discussion. And a lot of people who are pushing back against this bill say, well, actually, if that was right, then we wouldn't really need to be discussing whether people had the choice to end their lives or not.
I can't complain about the treatment that I'm receiving at the moment. It's been fantastic, and as I say, it does seem to be working. But I am fully aware that there is going to come a time where the drugs won't work, and that's when I'm going to need to seek an alternative.
And what would you want that choice to be?
Well, ideally, I would like to die at home, in my own home, surrounded by friends and family, and having a glass of champagne. But the reality is that probably I'll have to go to Switzerland.
Listen, stay there, Elise. I'm going to bring in Natasha Wiggins, who's from the Association for Palliative Medicine of Great Britain and Ireland, clinical lead for end of life and consultant in palliative medicine at the local hospital here. Natasha, welcome.
Hi.
And we've also got Carolyn Bell, Director of Patient Services at Prospect Hospice here. Carolyn, welcome to you.
Hello.
Natasha, when you hear Elise talk like that, and this is your area of expertise, she knows things are only going to get worse. What do you say when you hear somebody talk like that?
Well, firstly, I don't know if Elise is still on the call, but I'd like to extend my real sympathy to her situation. And I would hope to allay her fears, and to anyone else actually that's listening who may be in a similar situation or foreseeing a similar situation for them, is that actually this idea that there becomes a point when the drugs won't work isn't really accurate. It's a real fear. Like when I talk to people about what do you fear the most, they fear pain at the end of their life. And one of the things that is my job, it's Ken's job that you've heard about earlier, is often reassuring people that actually morphine isn't the only drug we have. And, there was a caller earlier that talked about, we've only got morphine and that's it. And actually, that's the benefit of a palliative care specialist, is that we have a whole range of strong painkillers, some of which are morphine or other opioids, but there are many different options. And part of my specialty that I've trained for years for is to be able to understand the right drug at the right time for the right patient. And I've seen many people die just as Elise once, in their home with a glass of champagne.
So you're saying that can happen with the right palliative care?
With the right palliative care, I firmly believe that can happen, and it does. I've seen it, But right now, it's not happening for everybody, and it's not happening everywhere.
And therefore, aren't you asking people to stay in a broken system and effectively die in pain? We know that many people do, because they're not getting the right kind of palliative care.
There is no straightforward way of suddenly transforming palliative care overnight. But what we do know is that countries or jurisdictions that have introduced assisted dying, their end of life and palliative care has improved much slower than countries that haven't introduced it. And in fact, countries that haven't introduced assisted dying, their end of life care in the last 10 years has improved 3 times better.
Listen, I'm just going to see if Elise is still on the line. I think she is. Elise, are you still there?
I am, yes.
What do you think to what Natasha has just said there? That, with the right kind of palliative care, you wouldn't have to leave the country. You could actually have the kind of death that you want with that glass of champagne in your own home.
I respect that position, but I don't think that for my particular illness, I don't think that is going to be the case. And it's not just about pain. It's about dignity. It's about choice as well, and autonomy. So pain is one very big aspect, but it's not just about that. Not for me, and I doubt for anyone.
Elise, thank you so much for joining the discussion, and we really wish you all the best with your treatment and your pain management going forward. We're going to bring in Carolyn Bell, Director of Patient Services at Prospect Hospice. And I know, Carolyn, you've been listening to the committee stages of this bill, because what we're doing is we're trying to examine, what's missing. I mean, lots of people saying this isn't the perfect answer because there's lots of problems with the bill as it stands at the moment. So you wanted to talk about a social worker you heard give evidence.
Yeah, there was a very good conversation yesterday led by a lead social worker in palliative care, and he described his role in supporting people and their families on this journey. And I think that something that hospices and end-of-life specialists do really very well is supporting the patient and the family, both in terms of preparing for death, the time of death, and afterwards. And I don't see that in the bill. And certainly here we can provide that wraparound care through palliative care, specialist palliative care social workers who are highly skilled at navigating their way through these very difficult, sensitive and often upsetting conversations with people, but to bring them through to the end at a position where there's understanding and acceptance and a better level of peace.
And this, what you're saying, it seems to be, pardon the word, but clinical in its delivery. The bill as it stands at the moment is, you either fall into this category or you don't, and as long as you are, mentally able to sign the right papers, they're kind of squaring all of that off, but they're not thinking of the wider impact of making that decision, not only on that person, but on the family as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's more, I believe there's more to it than 2 doctors authorising it and a judge sort of stamping consent for it. It's more complicated and complex than that, and to support people in palliative and end-of-life care, to have a whole team working around you, where we have physiotherapists, we have occupational therapists, we have clinical nurse specialists, we have a psychologist. There's a huge range of people we provide carers support. So there's a sort of package deal that we're able to provide, and in its rawest sense, I don't see that present in the bill that sits before us.
Natasha, you wanted to come back in?
Well, I just wanted to talk a little bit about, I was just reflecting on Elise's situation, and actually Elise isn't the first patient that I've met who is talking about wanting to die before is naturally happening for them. When I meet patients for the first time, they will often ask me to kill them. They will often say, I can't, the idea of loss of dignity is not acceptable to me, and I would like you to help me end my life. But what we know is that what becomes acceptable changes over time. And we know that when we ask them, what is it that makes you think that life isn't worth living right now? There's nearly always something we can do about it. And my fear is that if we don't have that option if we have the bill which says, oh, okay, that's what you want, we absolutely lose that whole swathe of people for whom actually they could have had 3 more Christmases. They could have had, seen their daughter get married. Because what we weren't doing is say to them, how can we improve your life? How can we make it worth living?
Is it possible, final question, that we could have a system where people have that autonomy, that there's enough protections in place, there's enough support, we amend this bill, there's everything you're talking about, Carolyn, bereavement care, all of those other attendant issues, that you can put that in the bill, but people can still have the choice to whether they decide to end their own life because they are suffering. We spoke to Professor Sheffer earlier on the programme, a palliative doctor of many, many years, and he said, yes, we can protect the 95% and still support the 5% to make that choice.
So I think the way that a society should behave is we should focus on what the most vulnerable need. And I cannot see, Dr. Jamila Zain has presented beautifully today at the Select Committee about the challenges of protecting people, the most vulnerable in our society. And as it stands, I cannot see a way that this bill would protect the most vulnerable in our society.
Thank you both so much for joining me around the table here in the cafe. You heard the voice there of Natasha Wiggins, Association for Palliative Medicine of GB and Ireland, also runs that department up at the local hospital, and Carolyn Bell, Director of Patient Services here at Prospect Hospice, and heartfelt thanks to Elise as well, who joined us and told us her story. Chris?
We're getting texts from our listeners, Claire, just basically saying that this is an absolutely fascinating discussion, all aspects of it, in fact, that we've been hearing since 4 o'clock from you. Ben in Plymouth, he's saying, I hear about 2 doctors being needed to sign off for a request for assisted dying, but when my mum was in a care home for 8 weeks dying from cancer, she couldn't get a single doctor to see her when needed. So many really important points that are being made by your guest there and also from our listeners, of course. If you want to contribute, then you've got until 7 o'clock to do so. 85058, of course, is the text number. We're talking about assisted dying, of course, at the hospice in Swindon. We're also talking about Rachel.
Just on the outskirts of
5 Live Drive
with Clare Mcdonnell and Chris Warburton on digital radio on BBC Sounds.
And ask your smart speaker to play BBC Radio 5 Live.
Good afternoon, welcome back to the final hour of Drive. Bit of a different programme for you this evening. I'm at Prospect Hospice, just on the outskirts of Swindon, and the reason I'm here is because the committee in charge of scrutinising the terminally ill adults end-of-life bill has been hearing evidence from medical and legal experts. So the bill passed the first stage in the Commons, you'll remember, at the end of last year. And this is the bit where the committee charged with scrutinising the bill, the cross-party committee, is listening to evidence from expert witnesses, people who say, well, I don't like this bit, I don't like that bit, we need to look at these protections. All of this evidence taken over 3 days. Some people say 3 days is nowhere near long enough. Anyway, 3 days is what has been given for this evidence to come forward, and then they will go away, and then they will amend the bill, and then that will go back to the Commons, and eventually it may well end up in the House of Lords. So that is why we are here. That is why we are discussing the thorny issue of end-of-life care and the potential changes to the law in England and Wales. I've been here all afternoon talking to people involved in care and those on the receiving end of care as well. Earlier I spoke to Chris, who is undergoing palliative care, and his wife Kate here at the hospice.
I was a little apprehensive coming in because you think about hospices as places to actually go to die, but it is so much more than that. They are the most caring a bunch of individuals that you ever want to meet. They go over and above everything they do. The food, the cleaners, everyone is just fantastic. It is just a wonderful place, and I've opted to actually come here to die once once the time does come, and I've got no qualms at all about dying here. It is an absolute beautiful setting, full of beautiful people. It is.
Kate, you're a registered nurse yourself, so I guess you would concur. You have understanding of these kind of facilities, but what is your view on the kind of help and treatment you've got out of this place?
Just been an absolute blessing. Unfortunately, when it perceives that your cancer can't be cured, and that's been our case as a family. Being signposted here to the hospice was just been the most valuable service, valuable opportunity we could have asked for myself and the whole family, our friends and family that have been able to visit here freely. It's just like a great big hug when you're living the most difficult, desperate times. Everybody here's lovely, smiley. I come here with a smile on my face every day to spend time with Chris. We would have been absolutely lost. I don't know where we would have been without this wider family of Prospect Hospice. Feel really, really grateful. Beds are so few, really the beds are so precious and so few, and funding's poor, and so we feel very, very lucky to have this opportunity.
We've come here today with the backdrop of the assisted dying bill being considered at the moment before it goes back to the Commons. Is this something that you have discussed as a family?
Yes, it is. Yeah, as an individual 3 years ago, that was perfectly healthy and fine. And I wouldn't have put any thought into assisted dying at all. But now I'm at the sharp end of it, and I'm starting to feel, the things that you feel before you die, the pain, the discomfort, and stuff like that. It does start to make you think that yes, maybe there is a window that needs exploring with with the right to die, where you want to die. It's just come out of a left field completely, this entire thing, and now I'm this far along the journey. It's sharpening my focus in on dying, death, and the pain and the sorrow it causes, and that people should have that right to actually to end their lives when they want to. Yeah.
Kate, this must have crossed your mind as well. What are your thoughts?
I think what would be so awful is if you were facing that decision, you made a decision to contribute to your own end of life, to have to travel overseas on your own, frightened. I think that's the bit that's incredibly difficult and so wrong. And if this bill does go through, the thought to be able to do that perhaps locally in your own country, maybe even in your own county, that's just going to make life so much easier and a much easier decision for people to make. And that's just the worst thing in the world, to think I'm on my own, I've got to make travel arrangements, I've got to go overseas, I can't really tell anybody because then my family will be in great trouble. So that's kind of the gist of our conversations. And I think I wouldn't want Chris to experience any unnecessary pain, or anybody. But it's a really big decision to think about, and it's not going to be, the bill won't come into play in our volition anyway, and certainly not for Chris.
It's been an absolute joy to talk to both of you. Thank you so much for allowing us to come in your room. Chris and Kate, thank you so much for talking to us on 5 Live.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
There we go, Chris and Kate, who are just up the corridor from where we are in the cafe here at the hospice. I'm joined around the table in the cafe now by Professor Julian Hughes, a retired NHS consultant in old age psychiatry, who also co-edited a book called The Reality of Assisted Dying, understanding the issues. Good evening, Professor.
Hello there.
Thank you so much for coming in. And we've also got on the line Charlie King, who's from Hospice UK. Charlie, hello.
Hi there, thanks for having us.
Thank you so much. Professor Hughes, let's start with you. When you hear Chris and his wife speak there, and Chris only became ill 3 years ago, and he said, I never really thought about it, but, you know, life isn't great at the moment. And he said, I wish I had the option that I don't have at the moment. What do you say to that?
Well, of course, we have to be very sympathetic to people like Chris. I mean, it's a terrible position to be in. And as a doctor, if he was my patient, I would be wanting to support him in every way that I could. But when we come to public policy, when we come to people who are having to think quite hard about the laws that are made, we have to remember that the laws will affect everybody, and that we want to make sure that that nobody is badly affected by the laws, that there are no unintended consequences of the laws. So we may have to be quite tough in terms of our thinking, or at least, and it may seem very tough to people, but there are principles which, sadly, I think in the debate don't really get considered so much.
Well, give us some of those then.
So the principle that I think has really influenced me was reading, because I didn't hear it at the time, but reading Lord Warburton in 1994. So Lord Warburton was a neurologist, and he was speaking in the House of Lords about he was reporting the work of a committee he'd chaired, and he talked about the terrible stories that his committee had heard about people having unpleasant deaths, and he mentioned that even some members of the committee had family members who had had such experiences. But then he said that society's prohibition of intentional killing is the cornerstone of law and social relationships. And for me, that's a very kind of basic principle, that if we bring in this law, the state is sanctioning doctors to go around and help people to commit suicide, basically.
In very specific, locked down circumstances is what people would say who support this bill. 2 independent medical practitioners and a High Court judge.
Yes, that's right. And so the people who are proposing the bill have tried to make it as tight as they can, but I worry about that. I worry about the assessment of capacity, and I worry about the problems about coercion. Yesterday in the committee we heard Professor Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer in England, talking about the Mental Capacity Act, and he said, and he's quite right to say this, that the Mental Capacity Act is used up and down the country every single day, and that he said it's well understood. Well, it is well understood when we're dealing with straightforward cases. What Professor Whitty didn't mention is the number of papers, studies, which have looked at the understanding and the knowledge of the Mental Capacity Act amongst those who are using it, and found that there are deficiencies. And I know this from my own personal experience.
Can you give us an example? What are the deficiencies you're talking about? Why would you be concerned that that act isn't really good enough to reference in these cases?
Well, so the deficiencies are things like, so for instance, you have to, one of the things you have to do is that you have to make sure that the person fully understands what it is that they're consenting to, if we're talking about, say, the consent to treatment. Now, the question is, how much information do you give the person? And it's very easy for people to give minimal information. So one of the worries about the bill, for instance, is that a doctor might very quickly form the opinion that the person has the capacity and to make the decision, and therefore they won't push them any further. But would they tell them that there are side effects to taking the medication, side effects such as nausea and vomiting? Would they tell them that the person might have the belief that they'll just have to take one single tablet and then they'll slip away nicely. They might not be told that under some regimes they would have to take a huge quantity of tablets that would have to be crushed up, that would be very unpleasant to taste, and they'd have to drink it very quickly, and that it might not even work. Some of them, they wouldn't be told that although it's the case that most people in the countries that have this legislation, most people die within about half an hour or so, but some people live 6 days after taking the medication. Now, the question is, do people get told all of that information?
Well, I mean, I guess supporters of this bill would say this is what they're hammering out at this committee stage, and everything you've raised is incredibly valid, and maybe that is something that needs to be put in. I just want to bring in Charlie King from Hospice UK, and I'm sure that's something you would agree, Charlie, with Professor Hughes on, and we've heard from many people, many voices here today, that palliative care needs better funding, and potentially people would argue, and you may be one of them, that if there was better palliative care, people may not have such a stark choice. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if the will of society is to introduce assisted dying as expressed by MPs, then that is something that we need to work with and think really carefully about how it's introduced in practice, in reality, as Julian has just articulated some of the very complicated issues. I think everybody would agree on all sides of this debate that it is an intolerable idea that someone should find themselves in a position that they may feel that they need to choose an assisted death because they are worried that they're not going to get the care that they need at the end of life. That's it. That I think, whatever you think about assisted dying in principle, I think that's something that everybody would agree on. And I think when we look at the specifics of the bill, as the MPs have been doing over the past couple of days in Parliament, what the bill sets out as stands is that someone as an individual in England and Wales would have, if you like, the right to an assisted death. But there is no such right set out in law to palliative care. So specifically, the bill says a doctor, as part of the conversations about assisted death, would have to make the patient aware of available palliative care, to the palliative and end-of-life care that's available to that particular patient. There's no provision in the bill to ensure that that palliative care is in fact actually there. And we know there's lots of evidence, and we see it up and down the country because of the pressures that hospices like Prospect, where you are today, are under, that palliative care does not currently meet the needs of people in the country. So, if you like, we have a situation in which the bill would guarantee that the state would be there to provide an assisted death. But there is no such guarantee that exists around the provision of good quality palliative care and end-of-life care. And I think, again, everybody would agree, regardless of what they think about assisted dying per se, that feels very out of kilter and not quite right. To put it differently, I know you will have heard a lot today about how hospices like Prospect are funded. So can we accept a situation in which the state fully funds an assisted dying service, but relies in very large part on charity? So that means people buying secondhand clothes or running marathons to provide palliative and end-of-life care. Again, I think most people on all sides of the debate would feel that that's a little bit out of balance. And so I think it's incumbent on Parliament now to if they continue down the track of introducing assisted dying, as is the will, it appears, of society, it's really incumbent on Parliament now to make sure that palliative and end-of-life care and hospice care is there for everybody. Otherwise, that principle of choice is not there, is not full.
Charlie King, thank you so much from Hospice UK. Just a final point, put that point back to you, Professor Hughes. Should there be provision in this bill, and this is what this whole committee stage is about, and amendments and how we make the law better. I mean, it's not law yet, but if it were to become law, if that were in there, if it was like, not only should you have a right to palliative care and advice and direction, but you should have palliative care offered to you, would you still be against people having the choice?
Well, personally, I would, because of that principle that I mentioned earlier. I would just add one quick thing about palliative care, which isn't often said, which is that obviously we need to have better palliative care services, but we also need to have better research on palliative care. One of the things I was impressed by in the lead up to the second reading was hearing of places where palliative care has teamed up with pain clinics. So pain clinics run by anaesthetists, they know certain sorts of stuff. Palliative care people know other sorts of stuff. When they come together, they're even more likely to be able to look after people even in quite considerable pain.
So there's so much more needs to be done, and you're saying there's specialists out there already looking into these areas. Thank you so much for dropping by. We really appreciate you giving us your time this afternoon. That's Professor Julian Hughes, a retired NHS consultant in old age psychiatry. And we also heard from Charlie King from Hospice UK. More from the Prospect Hospice, Chris, very shortly.
I think it's been some brilliant insight this afternoon about the challenges, obviously, that hospices are facing, but also the work they do. We're getting some texts on just that, actually, some personal stories from people across the country. I've certainly had experience with loved ones in hospice care, as will so many of us. This is a text from Rian that I just thought I'd share, and you can respond to, Claire, as well. It just says, "Hi, Claire and Chris. My husband died 2 weeks ago tomorrow at our local hospice, St David's in Llandudno. I'm very sorry to hear that, Rian, and our condolences to you." She says, "We were told at the hospital on the 19th of December that he had days to live, as they could do no more for him following a short illness. He was transferred to the hospice on the 23rd of December, died 4 weeks to the day from when we were told he had days. The care he and we received was amazing, and my husband was made comfortable with medication to manage any pain when needed. I believe we had the 4 weeks because of the care and management of pain and discomfort he received. We were able to spend time with him, have lovely conversations about our life together, as well as laughing with close friends about their past antics. He died peacefully and pain-free in his sleep. I don't believe we would have had that time without the dedicated care from staff at the hospice, and he went when he was ready. We are shattered by his death, but blessed to have had the time with him." Thank you for that. Such a personal and honest text, Rian. We really appreciate it. And a somewhat uplifting message, Claire, really, given what she's describing. And I'm sure you've seen so much of that today in terms of the work that people do there on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, truly inspiring. And everybody who's kind of left a former profession and come to work here say it's the best choice they've ever made. A lot of us are very frightened. We are all going to die. But it's amazing to come inside a facility like this with people who deal with it every single day and ease the path for so many people here. It's humbling.
Yes, absolutely. We will return to Claire in Swindon shortly. We will talk about...
No, but do you know what? I'm very open. Let's see what happens.
He's got a long evening. He'll bring you...
I want to hear from everybody around this table before the end of the programme. So I'm going to introduce you to Vic and Dom. Hello, Vic and Dom.
Hello.
Whose daughter Emma sadly died here at Prospect Hospice. We've also got Steph and her sister Judith, whose dad Derek founded Prospect Hospice 45 years ago. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's start with Steph and Judith. Who'd like to go first? Tell us your dad. Tell us how it all began.
Well, my dad was a Methodist minister. He moved to Swindon in the 1970s, and he saw his role as being to serve the local community, and particularly people in most need. And he set up quite a number of different organisations, or pulled people together to create organisations that were needed in Swindon. And in the 1970s, he was working as the chaplain for the hospital, and he became very upset at seeing so many people suffering at the end of their life. And so he and Campbell Drysdale, who was a consultant at the hospital, worked together closely to pull together all the people they needed to establish this idea, this hospice. And they consulted with the founder of the hospice movement,
Cicely.
Oh, that's right, Cicely Saunders. And he came back to Swindon and brought
here we all
that
are.
knowledge. And here we are.
And Judith, what do you think he would think about the building we're in today? There's so many lives that this facility helps.
Well, he'd be thrilled, but he actually died here as well. And to him, this was his greatest privilege to actually be here and talking about pain relief and the way that people are treated and the families in particular. He had a good death, and it was all managed very well. We were all supported, and yes, he just loved here.
Did you ever talk to him about assisted dying before he passed?
No, I didn't know.
Okay.
Personally, did you, Steph?
I think, I mean, he very much felt the importance was to make sure people had the care and support and everything they needed at the around the time of their death, and that was where energy should be invested.
Let's bring in Vic and Dom now. Thank you so much for coming along. You've got pictures of your beautiful daughter, Emma, and it's so important that you remember the whole person, and you've introduced me to her, so thank you so much.
You're welcome.
For that. Your experience then with Emma here.
So Emma died here March 24th last year. She was 32 years old. She had had a brain tumour for 8.5 years. But things were looking quite good. She'd had exemplary care throughout those 8.5 years. And things changed beginning of the year. And they told us, oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
They told us on a Monday that she needed to have palliative care. And we were given the numbers for Prospect and were due to have a meeting on the following Tuesday. Unfortunately, Emma became much more unwell that weekend and was admitted on Mothering Sunday last year. And she died here exactly 2 weeks later. And I say to people, this facility is the most incredible gift.
You're doing really well.
I'm sorry.
No, you really are. Oh, you're doing so well.
Gosh.
Yeah, Dom, do you want to just pick up for us? She's trying to talk about this facility we're in, and I guess how much it means to you and your family.
We will be forever indebted to Prospect Hospice. As I say, we had 16 days of care from them here, and Emma was treated as a person. They treat patients here, not a patient. Emma wasn't so much a patient; she was a person. Down to silly things like she loved her cup of tea, and she loved her Barry's tea bags. But the staff and the volunteers all knew what Emma needed. Looking after her personal care was all done with Emma's own, because that was very important to her. And as a family, we were given support. Emma was allowed to. And I keep saying it, if death can be beautiful, Emma got a beautiful death here at Prospect Hospice. And we as a family will be forever grateful. And going forward, we want other families to be able to receive that care and dignity and respect that Emma got. And for us, we will forever talk about Prospect Hospice and hospices in general, because we want other families to have that beautiful care and that beautiful experience that we have had. And so we cannot fund it from our pockets, but we need the funding model to be looked at. And hospices, and I will speak about Prospect Hospice obviously, but we need that funding model to be sorted out so that Prospect Hospice and other hospices will survive, because other families deserve the treatment that we have, the fantastic exemplary treatment given by the staff and the volunteers here. And volunteers are also a big part of it. Without them, we'd be all lost, and without Prospect, we'd be lost.
Oh goodness, I've lost my head again.
Oh, you're doing so well.
I think the most important thing to Emma, over the 8.5 years that she was unwell, there had been occasions we had to talk about what the end of life could be. And she said the most important thing to her was that she retained a sense of herself. And Prospect supported her in that right up until, well, actually, after she died, because they bathed her with her products and were so respectful of her and as a person. And nobody wants to lose a child. Nobody wants to. But if you have to, then this is such a nurturing environment, and it felt so safe for us being here. And yeah, we'll spend the rest of our lives supporting Prospect.
And it's the work they do here, but also in the community, because where I work, I have somebody being looked after by the community nurses from Prospect Hospice. They come out there, and it saves that person having to go to the hospital. So working with the hospices can take pressure off the NHS as well.
Vic and Dom, thank you so much. Listen, I just want to bring in, we've got 3 guests here. We've got Jeremy Loon, the CEO of Prospect House. We've got Carolyn Bell, who directs services here, and Natasha Wiggins from the Palliative Care Association. A final thought to all of you. You've got about 20 seconds each, but let's start with you, Jeremy. Your thoughts?
I can't really add anything to what these wonderful people have articulated. Assisted dying, great. It starts us talking about dying, which is really important. It's all about choice. We give people choice. We need a funding model that reflects that. End of. It's got to change.
Carolyn?
Yeah, I recognise what Jeremy said, but also a way of describing that would be assisted dying shouldn't be a choice, because good palliative care is not a choice.
Natasha?
As a palliative care consultant, I see hundreds of people dying every month, and the majority of them are calm, dignified, ordinary deaths. And it's really important that anybody facing their death remembers that, and not the horror stories that they've heard.
Okay, listen, we really thank you so much. And I'm going to go down. It's been such a moving experience to present this programme. Thank you all for coming down. And we hope you've learned something from 5 Live Drive tonight. Thank you. Take care of yourselves.